Hi, I'm Sean McVeigh with Sean's Outdoor Adventures, and this video is on how to hunt black bear. Now, I'm going to break this video down into a few different segments. Very briefly in the beginning, I'm going to talk a little bit about field judging a bear, just getting a rough idea about how mature it is. Then I'm going to talk about hunting bear by yourself. As part of that, I'm going to break it down even further into hunting with a bow as opposed to hunting with a gun, one or the other. And then I'm going to talk about hunting in a group of people, both with bow or with a gun. So there's going to be some different segments throughout this video. I'm also going to talk very briefly about baiting in the beginning, but the focus of this video is going to be hunting black bear that cannot be baited. I live in the state of Pennsylvania, and currently baiting is illegal for hunting black bear, or even using any kind of scent attractant of any type in the state of Pennsylvania is not permitted. So that's what this video is going to focus on. It's going to help you, those of you who hunt in that kind of a situation, it's going to help you have a game plan for being able to harvest a black bear. I also hunt in the state of New York, and they're the same way. They don't allow baiting, and so that's the focus of this video. So let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, I just want to talk about field judging a bear. Now, bear can look very big in the wild, and in fact, this bear down here, I shot this in Canada when I was 17, and I was standing on the ground holding the gun, and the bear walked out of the woods straight at me, and it was about 35 yards away. It was the first time I really had that kind of an encounter with a black bear, and in my mind, I was like, big bear, shoot. Now that I have more experience and I'm not in an intense situation like that, I'm able to step back and realize that there are a few things we can look at to help us realize if the bear is young or old, small or large. And as I was starting to say, this bear simply looked large, but it was only a 4-year-old bear. Or it was either a 3 or 4-year-old female. And so, first thing I want to talk about in field judging a bear is looking at its front legs. Okay? If the front legs look long, the reason is because the chest area has not been very developed yet. As the bear gets older, this chest area is going to increase in size. It's going to hang lower to the ground, which is going to make those front legs look shorter. So here's an example of a younger bear, maybe around a 4-year-old bear, maybe a 3 or 4-year-old. Its front legs look fairly long. I mean, just at a glance at this picture, this is a decent looking bear, but it's not very big. Now take that bear and compare it to this one that I got both of these bear I got trail camera pictures of this year. Now, this other bear, if you'll notice, the front legs look fairly short, and that's because of the girth of this bear. I mean, this is a big bear, and unfortunately the one picture I had of it, and I believe this is the same bear, the one picture the head was a little bit cut out of the picture frame there. Another thing that can help is if the ears look very small on the bear, it could be because the bear's head is much larger. If the ears look more pronounced and a little bit bigger, it's because the bear's head is smaller. Another thing to look for is the overall distance from the nose to the tail. A younger bear like this one right here, this is probably in its 2nd year. This bear, surprisingly, it's by itself and not with its mother. So, those of you, and let me just interject this, those of you who didn't know, bear cubs stay with their mothers for 2 years. So they'll be with them for a 2-year period. So anyway, looking at the distance from the nose to the tail, obviously the longer that distance is that you can determine, it's going to help with the age. So length of the bear, girth of the bear, those are some things to look for. Now I'm going to talk briefly about baiting. Now baiting is not the focus of this video, but I did want to just touch on it in case there's some viewers out there who have the opportunity to hunt black bear where baiting is permitted. Now this bear right here was actually harvested in Quebec, Canada. There, baiting is allowed. Now let me throw in a little tip. I was actually there on a fishing trip. We went to fish for walleye and pike. It wasn't set up for hunting black bear, although we were allowed to if we wanted to, because we asked in advance. So here's my tip. There are lots of outfitters in Canada and places like that that are outfitted for hunting black bear. And that means they get a lot of hunting pressure through those outfitters in some situations. For us, we were hunting on a lake that was not outfitted for hunting bear. So what we did is the pike and the walleye that we were catching and the fish carcasses that we had after skinning and taking the meat off the fish, we just threw them in a pile back in the woods. And after a few days, this bear came in and ate all the carcasses. Now, one of the things we did to let us know that the bear had come in eating the fish is we tied a fishing line to one of the carcasses and ran it into the house and tied it to some tin cans so that it would make the cans fall all over the place when a bear had been there. So one day we came back from fishing, the cans were everywhere. We knew the bear was coming to camp. So that night I sat out for the bear, and actually the first time it came in, I missed an opportunity. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because there's a little important tip for those of you who are baiting. The bear originally came in and I thought I had all kinds of time to shoot. So I was taking my time, getting ready, and the bear grabbed one of the fish carcasses and took off running. What bears sometimes like to do is that if they come across some form of food like that or a dead animal, they will like to grab it and run off with it and stash it in a place where they can get to it later. So if you're going to be baiting, keep that in mind. There is a chance when the bear comes in, you don't have all day to shoot. Don't rush yourself, but make sure you take a quality shot as soon as you can, because the bear could grab your bait and run off. If you can bait and there's an opportunity for you to tie the bait down in some fashion and it's legal to do that, let's say you have some form of a piece of meat that you can tie down so it can't run off with it, it'll hold it there a little longer, well that's something you might want to consider. But in my situation, like I said, it took off with the fish. Later on, I heard noise outside the cabin, so I grabbed the gun and I walked outside, and that's when it walked out of the woods right at me, like 35 yards away, and I quick pulled up and pulled the trigger. So for baiting, those are some things to keep in mind. Another crucial point is to make sure you're on the downwind side of the bait, because bear have an incredible sense of smell, and if they smell you, they're not going to come. And another thing to keep in mind is just like those of you who hunt deer and do a lot to eliminate human odor by using special soaps, washing your clothes in special soaps to eliminate odor, you'll want to do the same with black bear. Okay, now I want to talk about hunting by yourself for black bear. In Pennsylvania, currently, the bear season only runs for a few days. There's an archery bear season and a gun bear season. And I'm actually going to be presenting to the Pennsylvania Game Commission this year some ideas on some ways to adjust that to help with more bear harvest. In fact, the state of New York, you're allowed to harvest a bear any day out of the season. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to present some ideas, especially the viewers who are in Pennsylvania who only have that short window of time to hunt bears. I'll give you some ideas for that. But then I'll also try to broaden it so that if it ever changes, or if you're in a place where you're allowed to hunt more often than just a few days out of the whole year, these ideas will apply to you as well. So now I'm going to talk about hunting by yourself for black bear, and at first I'll talk about hunting with a bow and then hunting with a gun, because there's some things you can do a little differently depending on which weapon you have. So if you're hunting with a bow, and especially if it's Pennsylvania and you only have a few days, the thing to focus on is food sources. What are your key food sources? Now, we can only hunt bear in the fall, so their primary food sources in Pennsylvania are going to be things like acorn mast, the nuts that are on the ground, and they really, really hit those cornfields, those standing cornfields. They hit them pretty hard. In fact, there's a spot where I hunt near some public hunting ground that I've hunted there multiple times, and there have been many occasions where I've had encounters with black bear going from the woods toward those cornfields at dark during October, during that late season, late in the year, because they're trying to put on weight. They're trying to put on as much weight as possible before they go into hibernation. And so if you can find a spot where bears like to hang out during the day, and then find a nice standing cornfield and draw a line from one to the other, you might be able to set yourself up on a bear. In this situation, I'm hunting near the southeast point of a mountain. And I've hiked a lot of mountains and looked at droppings, and the bear do like to hang around the points of mountains sometimes. So if you can find the point of a mountain, whatever direction it's facing, just, scout that out. Do you see any bear scat? A lot of times you'll also be able to tell by looking at the scat what they're eating. And in the fall, you'll be able to see when they're eating a lot of corn. So try to find a spot they like to travel to the cornfield. And here's another little tip. In this particular area I'm telling you about, there's a little draw. It's just a little tiny ravine that comes down the mountainside. It's very faint. You can just barely see it on topographic maps, and you can, when you're hiking the side of the mountain, you can see the slight draw that comes down. And there have been many times I've spotted bear walking up and down right on the edge of that draw. So when you're scouting out, if you got a cornfield, if you got an area that they like to hang out on the mountain, and if you have a little draw coming down toward the cornfield, good spot to set up on. But what do you do if you don't have a cornfield nearby? One of the things I like to look for is thick areas. Now, where I hunt, the thickest areas are rhododendron and laurel patches. Bear like to hang out in those areas because they can hide real well. It's so thick, it's hard to walk through them. So when I can find good oak trees that are dropping a lot of nuts in those areas, that's where I like to focus on. So again, we're focusing on food sources, and let's also consider habitat. We like to look for thick areas. Bear like to hide out. If you know where there's some blown down trees, maybe a storm knocked down some trees, or they just fell over for some reason, if they create a good hiding place for the bears, those blown down trees, if you can locate them, sometimes it's good to set up near them, because they'll come out of those blowdowns at night and start milling around for food. And if you're in the right area, you might just get a shot. You could try setting up near them in the morning, but there's a lot of times when there's a decent amount of hunting pressure, those bears are already going to be hunkered down before daylight. Another thing that I would say when you're doing your scouting, aside from looking for scat, is bear like to have signposts. There's areas where you can tell that they rub, and I've observed bear rubbing on trees in the fall walking past me. Multiple bears in the same morning I watched one time rub the same tree. And there's been times I've been out hiking and I found trees like that. A lot of times they really seem to like to rub on pine trees. And I also have a friend who has a cabin. Right outside of the cabin there are two gigantic pine trees, and there is bear hair and scratchings all over. I think the bear like to get up there and rub their back on it, and they do it every year. So if you can find areas that the bear like to hang out in, you're going to give yourself an increased chance of getting a shot. Because you got to keep in mind, a bear's home range is several hundred square miles. So you could have a bear sighting on this spot one day, and he might not even come back there for several months, if at all. But there are also situations where bear will hang in and stay in certain areas. I know because where I live, there's a good number of bears that live in this area, and I know there have been years where we've had bears hanging right around our house. Even had a bear smack my house with its paw before in the past. And I left the paw mark on the window where he did that, or she did that, just as a little memento, Another thing to key in on, especially if you're hunting by yourself, is those travel corridors. Now, I set up some trail cameras on one trail this year in New York, and I got multiple black bear pictures on one trail. What you have is really thick woods because they have done a select cut. So it's very thick, it's very hard to walk through. But the skidder path trails that they drug the logs out on when they did the logging are still there. And so I set up some trail cameras on one of those, and the black bear were walking up and down that path because it's the easiest for a black bear to get through. So if you're hunting by yourself, it's a good thing to try to set up on one of those key travel areas. If you have a place that had been logged and there's some open trails, look along those open trails. There's so many times where I've found bear tracks and bear scat along those key trails. And in fact, I had a little bit of a close encounter with a black bear this year. I didn't get video footage of it. But I was on one skidder path trail, and then there was another one, another 80 or 90 yards over, and the bear walked that other trail instead of the one that I was on. So it just wasn't my day that day, but we were close to each other. If you know how to study terrain and topography and how animals like to utilize the topography in their travel patterns, it'll really help you. I'm planning to put together a DVD for people who are interested in that, especially for deer hunting, which will be available on my website. But basically, reading terrain maps, topo maps, and aerial photos for finding deer hotspots. But those same tactics apply to black bear. I mean, this year I went and hung trail cameras in a lot of those areas that I had picked from reading topo maps, and just one after another I was getting bear pictures, and I even had bear tear my cameras apart. But the reason why is just bear were traveling through those corridors that I found through studying the topography maps. So when you're hunting with a bow, your best bet is to try to set up, maybe get up in a tree stand so that your scent is above their sense of smell. If you can do that, it's a little bit harder to stalk around on them because it's hard to get within bow range. That being said, let's talk a little bit about hunting with a gun. You can do all the same things I just talked about, but one of the advantages with a gun is you have more distance that you can shoot. And that gives you the opportunity to do some still hunting and still do a fairly effective job. There have been times I've been walking through the woods, even during archery season, and spotted a bear in the distance, maybe within 80 yards, which isn't that far, but it's a little too far for a bow. For a gun, however, 80 yards is a fairly easy shot. You're pretty close for a gun. And so when you're gun hunting, if you have those areas where you know where the, let's say the oak nuts are, or even the crop fields, and there's areas between them where there's thick areas you know the bear might be hiding out in, you can kind of snoop around and try to stay on the downwind side of those areas for a shot. I've talked to people who have hunted in my area and sat in their tree stands for an entire day, and throughout the day saw 6 different bear, all between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. The reason I say that is, although there's lots of situations where bear will move right at dawn and right at dusk, similar to a deer, there's also a lot of situations where they are out all day long milling around. So when you're approaching bear hunting, you may want to focus on setting up near those food sources or near those potential bedding areas morning and evening. But during the day, you may want to just still hunt around and keep your eyes open because those bear could be out moving around. Especially if you know, I've been in woods where there's an abandoned apple orchard. You know, there's all kinds of trees growing up, and you don't even know they're there until you get down in there and you see all these little crabapple trees. Well, those are great spots that can draw some bear in as well as deer in the fall. Last thing I'll say about hunting with a gun by yourself is don't be afraid to hunt heavy pressured areas. In fact, it may even work in your favor. When there's lots of hunters around and there's people doing drives for the bear, like driving the bear, they can push a bear to you. If you have a crew of people driving past you, don't give up on the spot. There are many, many instances where bear will slip right through the drivers and go behind them. And if you're hanging back there and one happens to do that, you might just get a shot. So when you're hunting by yourself, if you see other people moving around, don't fret, don't worry about it. They could actually push a bear to you. That being said, I want to move into talking about hunting in groups, because in areas like Pennsylvania, this is one of the most effective ways to harvest a black bear, is through working in groups, setting up drives. Now, there's a lot of big bear crews around here that do a lot of driving. And I know my friend hunts with bear crews that do that, and they use handheld GPS to help coordinate everybody on the drive. So they'll put up standers on one end of the woods, and they'll get a line of guys. Each guy is about 40 yards from the person next to him, and they'll just walk through the woods making some noise. And there's maybe a couple people that have handheld GPS that monitor the way they're going, and they make sure everybody is staying in line. And that's very important. You try to keep everybody in line so that you're pushing evenly, so it makes it harder for the bear to slip back through you. Now, that being said, let me just say, well, first of all, you have to be very careful if you're doing a drive. But here's a crucial thing. Like, I listen to some of these people put these drives together, and they really try hard. And like, we're gonna set you up, all the standers up on this end, and we're gonna go park the trucks here, and we're gonna drive this, that, and the other thing. And they're going through all this work, and they never stop to analyze the wind direction that day. There's crews that say, oh, we do this drive every year, and last year we got 4 bears on this drive. And then the year before that, none. This year and maybe the next 3 years, maybe none. The reason why is because they're not playing the wind. You have to wait until you're on site to finalize your game plan. You need to be prepared for different wind directions when you get there. So look on a map, pick your spot out, and then say, okay, based on this and where we think the bear are going to be hanging out, how can we drive it based on a north wind? How can we drive it based on a south wind? How can we drive it based on an east wind or a west wind? And you have to put a plan together, a foolproof plan in advance. That way, when you get to the site, you get out of your vehicle, just stand there and monitor what the wind is doing. What's the prevailing wind direction? And put your standers on the downwind side of the wind. Then take your drivers after they're in position and slip up around to the upwind side. Those bear will already start moving in some situations as soon as they smell this movement up here from the drivers, and then bring them through the woods. If your standers are on the upwind side of the bear are not going to run that way. They already know there's danger there, and when this is coming this way, they're going to try to slip out the sides of the drive, or they'll try to funnel their way back through, or they'll know where the thickest areas are that they might even be able to hunker down until you walk past them. Okay, wind direction is crucial. Bear have, as I said before, amazing senses of smell. Now, that being said, a lot of drives for bear have often been done in Pennsylvania using guns. But in the most recent years, they've allowed an archery season for bear. They've also legalized crossbows. If you have access to a crossbow, it can be a very effective tool in doing the same drives for bear. There's a guy from my church, and he has a whole crew of guys that go bear hunting every year. And ever since they started allowing archery bear season, they have been harvesting more black bears in the archery bear season than in the gun bear season. The reason why is because there are some bears that, in the way the timing of the seasons are right now, there are some bears that actually go to den and hibernate before the gun season comes in. And that's why I'm going to be presenting some things to the Pennsylvania Game Commission this year for a few changes for that reason. But anyway, they've been more successful in the archery season because, one, there are some bears that would have been denned up in the gun season that they still have access to. Also, the bears haven't received that amount of pressure yet. And thirdly, they're able to still effectively harvest them because when you set up a drive right, there's a lot of times those bear come out very close to the standers. In fact, some friends of mine had a guy who came up and hunted with them this year, and he shot a black bear about 10 or 12 yards away. He was gun hunting, but that's how close the bear was. You can make that shot with a bow or a crossbow. That being said, let me also say, if you're going to use a bow, take some time to practice moving shots. I had a video that I produced a few years ago. It was a deer hunting video, but I had about a 24 yard shot at a buck that was walking, and because there was another buck that kind of already spotted me a spike and was acting real spookish, I didn't want to try to grunt stop the deer. So I shot it on the walk. beautiful shot. And the reason I'm bringing this up is you have to practice that shot. If you're going to archery hunt for bear and do drives, you do have to be ready to shoot at a moving bear. Well, this is important for those of you who want to try this, and it may even apply to gun hunting a little bit. And if it's a running bear, as far as leading it, you may have to practice that shot in some way. I've seen people roll a tire, like maybe blow up a balloon and then tape it inside a tire and roll the tire down a hill. And you could do this with a gun. You could try to shoot the balloon with your archery equipment. If you have to set this up safely, people, be very cautious with a dirt hill behind it. And it has to be safe. You know what I'm talking about. But with a bow and arrow, you could practice the moving shot that way. Or you can mentally practice. I do a lot of mental practice. I analyze the speed of the animal, and I know how fast my bow is, so I know how soon I need to let go. So here's the key. When the animal is walking into, let's say your sight pin is right here, and your animal's walking like this, depending on the speed is going to depend on when you release. On a normal walking speed, for me, 25 yards or less, when my sight pin is in the middle of the shoulder blade. So if, let's say the shoulder blade is this big, when my sight pin's in the middle, I release, so that by the time my arrow reaches the animal, that is going to hit right behind the shoulder blade, which is what I did with that 6-pointer that I just showed you. The same applies for black bear. If you're going to do drives with archery equipment for black bear, make sure you practice in advance for shooting on the move. I want to thank you for tuning into this video today. I hope you found it helpful, maybe picked up a few tips that will make you a little more successful in bear hunting in the future. If you'd like to make a contribution for this or any of my other videos, you can do so at the bottom of the videos page of my website, Sean'sOutdoorAdventures.com. Also, if you'd like to support what I'm doing, you can do so by buying one of the books I've written. With the books, I kind of take more of a spiritual angle of things. Although I provide a tremendous amount of tips and information, I also like to implement a few of the spiritual and prayerful ideas that I have. If that interests you, one of those books might be very enjoyable to you. If that doesn't interest you, I also am in the process of putting together some DVDs that are more of just the nuts and bolts. Like I mentioned earlier, the topo reading and the aerial photo reading to find deer hotspots, deer hunting hotspots. I'm also planning to do an extensive video on how to hunt white-tailed deer, whether it's scouting and just everything. I'm going to put a lot of information into that video. So if you're interested in any of that and not so much in the spiritual stuff, maybe consider picking up one of those DVDs. When they become available, you'll be able to get them through the store page of my website, which I mentioned before is Sean'sOutdoorAdventures.com. Once again, thanks for tuning in. I hope you stay tuned for future videos. Until then, take care and God bless.